The following is a local resident producer's program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everybody, welcome to Eye on Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz, and I want to thank Tony Palmieri for filling in for me. I'm going to thank him again later, but right at the outset, I've been gone for the entire month of November and undergoing some surgery and recovering from that, and Tony was great in pinch hitting for me, so you know, we couldn't have had this show on the air during the month of November if it wasn't for him. So a big shout out and thanks to Tony for that. We're happy to have you joining us this evening, and for those of you who are with us, our guest this evening is Tracey Robertson. She is the co-founder of Fit Oshkosh. And I want to make it very clear that it's not a fitness club, it's not a health organization or anything like that. She's going to talk all about what they are and what they do during the course of this hour. But in a nutshell, it's a grassroots nonprofit organization that seeks to increase the racial literacy and technology literacy of adult residents in and around Winnebago County. So that sounds like a mouthful, and I'm sure it is a tall order, but you're here to kind of drill down into it and wrap it all up for us, Tracey. So welcome. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it very much. Thank you for having me. I want to start by finding out a little bit about you and your background. And the co-founder is Dr. Jennifer Chandler, who's associated with UW Oshkosh. And maybe you can just, she's not here with us tonight, but for the viewers' benefit, maybe you can give us a little bit of a background on what, you know, her history is and how the two of you came together to form Fit Oshkosh.
Great, I'm happy to do that. Well, I was born, raised, and educated in Chicago, Illinois. I relocated to Oshkosh. It'll be 4 years this coming August. And as a minority relocated to the area, found it a really difficult city to find a place in, to find a place that I fit. And when I talked to other minorities in the community, that was kind of the common theme, that I'm here, I work here, but I'm having a difficult time here and it doesn't feel like a place that I fit. Thus the name Fit Oshkosh.
Mm-hmm. Now, can I just interrupt you for a minute?
Absolutely.
Why is it that you didn't feel that you fit? Was it because, coming from Chicago, of course, we're a much whiter community, if you will.
Sure.
You know, was that part of it, or tell us what made you feel like you weren't fitting in?
That's a great question. A lot of it was the kinds of comments that people would make to me when I relocated to Oshkosh. One of those comments that I still hear, that my daughter hears all the time, is that I speak well, as if that comes as a surprise to people that dark-skinned people can articulate a thought. So there were lots of things like that were being said. There were lots of things that were not being said. When we look at Oshkosh, there aren't a lot of people of color. I'd venture to say very few people of color who are in positions of leadership. Mm-hmm. So some of it was that. Some of it, of course, was being in a place that is predominantly white. Yeah. In Chicago, where I lived in a community that was very close to the University of Chicago, so it was very diverse in terms of race, socioeconomics, education level. So that certainly was a change, but it wasn't the overriding theme that made it challenging for me as a professional to be here and socially to be here.
Mm-hmm. So go ahead with your background then, as far as, you know, where you've been from an education standpoint,
Sure.
How you came to form Fit Oshkosh.
Sure. So I've worked in Chicago, Illinois all of my life. I worked for the Chicago Transit Authority for many years. I segued from there and worked for a social impact company called Connected Living. They were a Boston-based firm, and I ran a technology literacy. I was the director of a technology literacy program for that organization. And Dr. Chandler recently got her PhD. A great deal of the work that she did with that PhD, to earn that PhD, was based on race and racialized behavior. So she was a great fit for us. When I moved to Oshkosh, I, again, had some challenges kind of assimilating to the I had some challenges kind of assimilating to the community. So I just started talking to some colleagues of mine about that. One colleague in particular, her name is Janine Wright. She and I would meet regularly and kind of talk through some of the things that I was experiencing. And from those conversations, we were having some rich, brave conversations about race and what it means to be a person of color and what it means to try to assimilate into a community like Oshkosh. And we would then take our learnings from those conversations home and to work and talk to other people about them. And they thought, wow, you really had that conversation. You really talked about that. I'm learning a lot. So we thought, well, we're onto something. We really need to invite other people into these conversations. So at that point, we started having monthly diversity discussions. They're now called On Common Ground. And we meet every single month at a different house of faith in Oshkosh. And we typically watch a movie or a clip that discusses differences of all kinds. And then we'd have facilitated conversations about those clips that we saw. And the the On Common Ground discussions just grew legs. People started coming. We had a cult following of people that would come every month and bring people along. We were practicing our racial literacy. Yeah. And so the university recognized the work that we were doing as just community members. And we recently, last year, received a grant, one of the Creating a Stronger Community grants from the university to continue our work. Dr. Chandler was one of the people who would regularly attend the On Common Ground discussions. And she and I started talking about, you know, the work we're doing here is fantastic, but how do we reach people who may not know they need to be a part of these conversations? Mm-hmm. How do we extend our reach? And that's when we decided to form Fit Oshkosh as a nonprofit and to create some workshops and start facilitating workshops to discuss racial literacy in Winnebago County. Okay.
And we're going to, during the course of the hour, we're going to, of course, be talking about you know, what your workshops are and who they're designed for and who you present them to and that kind of thing. And you've got some other exciting projects coming up. So we want to touch on all of that. But let's focus on what exactly racial literacy is, because I know what it is now, sort of, because you and I talked in setting up this show. Mm-hmm. But I'm still not sure, honestly, that I have the best handle of it. But before I started talking with you, when I heard the words racial literacy, I thought, well, how does this differ from, like, you know, we all hear about political correctness and what you should say and what you shouldn't say. And so how, are they similar at all, or are they very different from each other?
They are very different from each other.
Really?
Very different from each
other. So my initial thought was way out in left field.
Sure, sure. So oftentimes when I'm talking to people about racial literacy, I use the scenario of financial literacy. Everyone knows what financial literacy is. Mm-hmm. It's taking a deep dive into your finances and understanding at a really basic level how to make your money work for you, right? Racial literacy is kind of its cousin in that it really is taking a critical look at race. It's having, it's the ability to converse about race honestly and sincerely. It's an ability to look at some of the racialized, to analyze some of the racialized behaviors that we all participate in, all see all the time, it's deeper than that. It's not about saying the right thing. In fact, we consider our conversations about racial literacy we've been taught to be colorblind, which in my opinion is a safe conversation. We encourage our participants to have color brave conversations. And in those conversations, we give you an opportunity to say the wrong thing. We all say the wrong thing, and that's okay. What racial literacy does, however, is when you say that wrong thing, you now have the critical tools to say, well, why was that? To understand for yourself why that was wrong, or why that came out of my mouth, or why I think that way, or what have I been taught along the way? What in this process, in this journey, gave me that idea? So it's a deeper dive into race and the ability to have sincere conversations about it. And sometimes that's saying, I don't know. Or sometimes that's saying, I said the wrong thing, but I now understand that I said the wrong thing, or I said a thing that might be offensive.
Well, and, I have to be honest and say that that's something that scares me a lot too, because I was born and raised in Oshkosh.
Sure.
And as you said, it is predominantly white. But I'm trying to think how many years ago it was now. It was probably about 30 years ago. I moved to Houston.
Okay.
From Oshkosh. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
It was culture shock in every shape, form, and fashion that a person could imagine. And one of my closest friends, right off the bat, became an African-American woman that I was working with. And we just connected. But as time goes on, black used to be an accepted vernacular.
Yes.
Negro used to be many, many years ago, and then it became black. And then that sort of became not so correct, and it became African American or person of color. And I'm very aware of that in my day-to-day work, because one of the people that I write for on a regular basis is an African American couple in California, but they have a publication also in Louisiana. So I'm dealing with a lot of folks of color, if you will, down in Louisiana. And I was very honest with one time, and I just said, can I just ask, because I want to know how to write this properly, is it okay to say black? Do I need to say African American? What is the right thing to say? Because I don't want to be offensive to anybody.
Sure.
Or hurt someone's feelings. But I also think sometimes we can get way bogged down with trying to be so politically correct that we can't see the forest for the trees. And so she said, I don't know about other people, honey, but you say black if you want to.
Sure.
And I said, whew, that's a load off my mind.
Sure.
So I'm very, I guess, aware, or at least I try to be, of what I'm saying to folks when I'm talking to them, no matter what their race or ethnicity is, because I don't want to be talking to whites and use the wrong words either, because I want to try and, be a role model, if you will, and use the right words.
Sure.
But it is difficult sometimes to know what the right words are, and in trying to say the right words, not offend anybody, really.
Yep, and I think what you've done, that's a perfect example of putting a lot of energy in the words and not a lot of energy in the systemic issues that matter to me. It doesn't matter to me if you call me African American or if you call me black. My personal preference is black. But that's not really what racial literacy is. It's not what racial literacy does. What racial literacy would teach you to do is be able to have that authentic conversation.
Okay.
That's what racial literacy is. That's what we teach people how to do. We teach people how to think about race critically. It's more than that, because we can get caught up in all the inertia of, hair and music and all those things that keep us from really having deep conversations about race. That's not what this is about. Yeah. This is about really, when you're setting policy, when you're talking about your show and you're asking questions of your guest, how does the question you ask include everybody? When you're hiring people, when you're making business decisions, when you're teaching in a school, when you're in leadership in an organization, what story is my organization telling, and how does that embrace people of other cultures? That's what racial literacy teaches you how to do.
Okay, all right.
I hope that's
good.
helpful.
It is, and I'm hoping that the viewers will kind of understand that too.
Sure.
And yet they do seem to kind of dovetail just a little bit. I don't know, but I guess I've kind of been getting bogged down in words, like you
Sure.
said, and yet I don't think that I've slacked off in other areas either. And we were talking about this before we started to tape. It would just be a much simpler world if everybody would just be colorblind and just treat each other with common respect that we all deserve, and just not think about everything else. Just live and let live. And that would be an easy thing. And it should be an easy thing. Mm-hmm. But society as a whole, I think, we have things from our upbringing that, throw things into the mix from that. We see things in the media, we hear things from our friends and our family, mm-hmm. and all of that, I think, plays a role in how we treat other people.
Yes. And
it's hard sometimes to shake the things you were taught as a child.
Absolutely.
I can remember, yes, this is a predominantly white community, but as a child, we had, I believe they were Korean neighbors. And my mother was very close friends with them, and I was just taught at a very young age, and my brother was taught at a young age, to just respect people for who they are and what they are, not what color they are, not what religion they are, not what, kind of car they drive or their status financially in life. Just treat people as people with respect. And that's an easy thing to say, and it's an easy thing to do if you just try,
mm-hmm. And that's the whole colorblind approach, right? I'm going to make friends with my Korean neighbors, and that makes me okay. But what that doesn't do is teach you, the colorblind approach hasn't worked. That's what we're seeing acted mm-hmm. out in the media right now. It doesn't respect other people's cultures. You can't look at me and say that you don't see that I'm a different color than you. Mm-hmm. You do see that.
Sure, of course.
So if you start our interaction with that fallacy of, I don't know that you're black, then we really could never have any authentic conversation. You're never going to be better for having known me, and I'm never going to be better for having known you. That's the colorblind approach, which isn't working, which is why we see these issues that we're seeing all over the country about race.
Okay.
Racial literacy is not about having a friend of a different color. Does that help? Absolutely, because it's hard for you to oppress someone that you know. Mm-hmm. Sure, that's helpful. Racial literacy is about understanding the core of who I am as a person, or making an attempt to do that anyway. Mm-hmm. That's what racial literacy is about.
And I guess when I say colorblind, I don't, look at someone and say, no, I don't, you're not black.
Right.
That's not what I'm doing. I use that word in a very general sense because, of course, like with my friend that I was talking about in Houston, I said, and I was very naive, of course, coming from Oshkosh.
Yes.
I noticed that their hair was different, and I said, "Well, why do you use Jerry curl and mm-hmm. and stuff like that?" Mm-hmm. And I really did delve into why they do the things they do,
sure.
why they gravitate toward the music that they gravitated toward, and things like that. So when I say the word colorblind, I wasn't suggesting that people should just say, there's nothing different about you. You're just another person, mm-hmm. Even though you are another person, but you have different things in your background that make up who you are.
Mm-hmm. I think you raise a fantastic point when you say, I'm just from Oshkosh and I didn't know. We think racial literacy is a 21st century skill. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? It means that you need these tools to be successful in the global world that we now live in.
Yeah.
So when the U.S. Census Bureau is predicting that within the next 30 years, whites will be the minority, if not sooner.
Okay.
So there are implications for you, for me, for our city, for our country, for our businesses, for our government that need to change, because doing business the way we've done business, engaging with people the way we've engaged people will not work in that environment.
Okay.
Let me give you a couple of examples
Sure.
that we cite a lot in our training. One of the things that we tell people is, some people will say, okay, so great, there are going to be more brown-skinned people than there will be white people. I'll just pick up my things and move. Well, where are you going to go?
Yeah.
Because this is not exclusive to Winnebago County or Wisconsin. This is all over the world. So what are the implications for you as a white person who lives for the next 30 years? There are a couple things that are always very eye-raising for people who participate in our training. The first thing is that the likelihood that your children or your grandchildren will partner someone who's not white increases. It's a sheer numbers game. They may not marry them, they may not procreate, but at some point they're probably going to partner with someone who is not white. The time to practice your racial literacy is not at the altar when your granddaughter's getting married to someone who's a non-white. Probably not a great idea. The time to start practicing those skills is now. Let's look at it from a business perspective.
Okay.
That means that your customers are going to look different. Your boss is going to look different. So doing business the same way we've always done business doesn't work. I mean, we're doing that every day now. If you pick up the telephone and you call some company for IT support, the person you're talking to probably has brown skin. We're practicing our racial literacy all the time, every day.
And probably in a totally different country.
And probably in a totally different country. So when we have college students leaving places that are like Oshkosh and going to universities and other places, and they walk into a university and say, I don't know because I've only lived in a white world, that's not positioning them for success. That's setting them back.
Okay.
And
that's where your organization comes in.
And that's where our organization comes in.
I want to, continue this conversation, but there was one thing that kind of confused me a little bit because I don't know how it fits in to racial literacy, is the technology literacy.
Yes.
And boy, do we need people to understand technology.
We do.
So how did you pick those two things for Fit Oshkosh?
That's a great question, and I'm so glad that you asked it, because people ask that question a lot. They don't see those two things as aligned, but they really are. So when we think about people who have access to technology at home, those people are typically white people. Those people are typically middle-class people. The people who don't, there's a huge digital divide in this country. The people who don't have access to technology are typically people with brown skin, people who are seniors, people who are poor and live in poor communities. So our goal is to give those people technology literacy skills so that they can better position themselves for employment. So when our seniors can feel less isolated and feel more engaged, it helps them with, it's been proven, it's a proven skill to help them with Alzheimer's and dementia, technology literacy.
Sure.
It's also a 21st century skill.
Yeah.
You can't apply for a job unless you know how to go on the internet.
Yeah, I've been trying to help my father wade through some things, and for 86 years old, he's pretty technologically aware. He bought his little tablet, and he's got his laptop, and he's got his iPhone. But a lot of the times he doesn't understand how to use it, and so I'm finding myself having to try and explain those things. But I give him a lot of credit for trying.
Sure.
Sure. Now, what does surprise me about what you just said, though, Tracey, is that there are a lot of blacks who don't have access to technology, because that just surprises me.
At home, you can certainly go to the library. That's
well, but I see everybody. I don't care what color they are. I see everybody with phones. A smartphone and a cell phone of some kind.
It's challenging to apply for work on your smartphone, right? You need a computer. You need a laptop. We've also found that, particularly in the senior population, that one of the things that we do when we work with seniors is we help them do a lot of journaling and storytelling, because we found that a lot of their stories, a lot of their history has been lost. So when we worked in communities in Chicago, in senior living communities in Chicago and low-income communities, we've met, for example, there was one gentleman who had been a very famous jazz singer. And when we entered that community, nobody knew who he was. He was very isolated. He was very quiet. He was one of the more quiet residents. And we came in and started talking to him about technology and helping him to journal and tell his story. And he ultimately shared with us that he'd been in this really famous jazz band. We were like, fantastic. So we got on YouTube and started pulling up some of his materials. And then we showcased his work to other residents. I mean, when you think about a resident who felt disenchanted with his experience, with his life, his story wasn't being told. And when we think about seniors and people whose stories are not being told, those typically are black people. I mean, we look back at history books and all the innovations that dark-skinned people have created, the stop sign, all the things, all the conveniences that we take advantage of now. Who's telling those stories? Nobody's telling those stories. So I think they're very much in line in that we have an opportunity to empower and capture the histories of dark-skinned people of this country, but we also have an opportunity to help them practice those 21st century skills. We know that there are a lot of seniors here in Oshkosh who are raising grandchildren. Well, if you don't have a computer at home, how can you help your grandchild with their homework? So that's one of the areas that we put a lot of emphasis on.
Well, that makes sense now that you've explained that, so thank you for that. When we're talking about racial literacy, because that's, I would say, probably the primary thing that you guys do.
Yes.
What do you see as some of the greater challenges or the greater issues that need to be addressed in Oshkosh when it comes to racial literacy?
Well, for everyone, it's a pretty new conversation. People tend to think whenever the word race comes up, we're talking on a continuum. Either you're a racist or you're not. That's a very challenging sell, because when we teach our courses, this isn't about you're a racist or you're not. We never talk about that. We never accuse anybody of that. So it's a challenging sell. I always say to Jennifer, we're not selling mint cookies. So because people feel very personal about it. People feel like you're saying or implying in some way that I've contributed to racism, and I haven't. Maybe my grandparents have, maybe their grandparents have, but I haven't. But what we know about race to be true is there's nothing neutral. We've all participated in race, in racialized behavior, in racism and racialized behavior in some way. Whether that's you heard that joke that was inappropriate and you didn't stop your colleague from telling it. That's racialized behavior that we've all participated in. So one of the big challenges is the sell. It's having that conversation. It's branding racial literacy and why do I need it? The other big challenge we find is the why do I need it part. How does it contribute to sustainability? When we talk to young, progressive people of all colors, because that's one thing that people have a big misconception about, that racial literacy is about stopping everybody from being racist. Racial literacy helps everybody. It helps white people more than it helps people of color, because when we think about race, when we think about how this is all going to work, right? You need to be able to talk about race. You as a white person, you as a white educator need to be able to successfully engage minority children. You as a business owner, you as a faith leader, you as a nonprofit, you as a government official, everybody needs racial literacy skills. So it contributes to our city. How can we have a progressive city? When we talk to young professionals who are white, who we want to, hey, come to Oshkosh, when they're thinking about where to go, Oshkosh is not a city of choice because they don't view it as progressive. Those young professional couples who have children want to raise their children in a progressive, really inclusive, and not just on paper, but really inclusive and inviting community. So when they're looking to relocate to Wisconsin, they're not coming to Oshkosh, they're going to Appleton. because they see Appleton as more progressive. When we're talking to young, middle class, educated Black professionals, they're saying, I'm here for this period of time, I'm here for that period of time, I'm here to accomplish this goal, and then I'm leaving Oshkosh. So it contributes to the economic sustainability of our city.
Sure.
It contributes to our ability to attract people to our churches. So it has a huge impact for everyone. And that can be really challenging for people to understand. Again, it's a new conversation.
Sure.
So,
you mentioned about attracting people to, churches. That's one of the conversations that we had at my own church is, how do we attract more minorities into the church?
Sure.
Unfortunately, I don't think any of us realize that at some point we're the white person in the church is going to be the minority, and I find that fact interesting.
Yes.
It's a staggering thought.
It is.
When you really start to kind of drill into that and think about it. But in any event, we were trying to, come up with ways that we could welcome and establish a more diverse congregation,
yes.
if you will. And so, and I think, all churches probably need to look at that. But it is hard to do, I think, when there are churches that are specifically for the Laos or the Hmongs or Black people or whatever the case may be. And that leads me to another question.
Okay.
But if you want to address that first, I'll just make a note of what else I was going to ask you.
I do, because the faith community, surprisingly, has been a really challenging community to have this conversation with. One of the reasons is because pastors see this as a faith issue. So if my congregation is not inviting or comfortable with people of different backgrounds, it means that I failed as a pastor in some way. I haven't prayed for them enough. They're not where they need to be on a spiritual level. So pastors have been taking this very personally. But it's not that. There are people in churches, there are people in leadership roles in churches who love God, who serve unapologetically. But there are all kinds of isms in the church. There are people who have issues with alcoholism. There are people who have issues with sexism. There are people who have all kinds of isms in the church. There are people who serve on your leadership who have a challenge with racism. They do. It's a sin just like any other sin. So sharing that fact with pastors and saying either you get more racially literate or your church doors are going to close because your demographic is going to close. And this is not unique to Oshkosh. It's not unique to this day and time. I mean, there's a reason why churches are Sunday is the most segregated day of the week, like you alluded to.
Yeah.
So this is a deeply ingrained systemic issue that we've had in this country and all over the world for a long time, just like racism.
Okay. Getting to the question that I made a note of here, just like there are specific churches for different people of various ethnicities and race, there are Black chambers of commerce.
Yes.
And Hispanic chambers of commerce. And I know it's not really part of racial literacy, and yet it is, I suppose, in a way. But, dealing with businesses, because a lot of the stories I write are business and commerce related. And I've always thought to myself, we're a melting pot. We should be anyway. And I don't understand it. And this may not sound politically correct. It may not sound very racially literate. So,
but you're practicing, and that's okay.
I'm practicing.
Yes,
I'm trying.
Yes, you are.
So forgive me in advance if I, put my foot into my very big mouth at this point. But I've wondered to myself, look, you've got the Blacks, and you've got the Hispanics, and you've got the Laos, and all these different races and ethnicities that want to be in mainstream America, mainstream business, what have you, and they don't want segregation, but yet they choose to segregate themselves by having an Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, a Black Chamber of Commerce, an Asian Chamber of Commerce, and what have you. Now, on the one hand, I suspect they feel like they maybe don't get a fair shake in some of the other chambers of commerce, and so that they have to form their own. I don't know. But can you explain why that is? Because it almost seems like they are segregating themselves by choice in some ways. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
I understand why you're
asking.
asking.
And I hope I haven't offended anyone.
You have not offended me. No, not at all.
Or anyone.
Or anyone. I wouldn't think so. So let's take a step back. When we look at places, let's use Oshkosh. It's simple to use. We're here. Mm-hmm. When business owners, when you go to any meeting of any power players in Oshkosh, how many of those people are black? How many
Probably
of those people
very few.
are very few or any?
I would say in most cases none.
How many are Latino?
Probably very few to none.
How many are Hmong?
We have a large Hmong population here, but I would say very little.
Very little. So as a business owner, as a thought leader in this community, as a person that's setting policy in this community, I'm making decisions based on, I'm setting policy, I'm bringing in commerce, I'm trying to track commerce based on my one singular experience. Mm-hmm. The systems that we have in place are not designed to empower me and not designed to put me in the best position, because what I need as a business owner, what I need as a citizen hasn't even been considered. Not A, because I'm not at the table, but B, because the people at those tables have little to no racial literacy. Most adults here have probably a preschool level of racial literacy. They've never talked about it. They've never thought about it. So when those decisions are being made, that's why you find these organizations splitting off. Mm-hmm. You know, we talk a lot. I go to meetings all the time here, and people talk about inclusion and diversity. And really, when we say those words, we mean, Tracey, you can come in. We won't burn a cross if you move here. Nobody's burning crosses on our lawns here. I mean, let's be honest. We're not doing that here. People are Midwestern nice to me, mm-hmm. right? But when they are making decisions at the school system, the superintendent is making decisions. He's not considering my children, because my children aren't at the table, right? He's not considering, business owners are not thinking about my needs or what I value, because they don't know. They've never bothered to ask me. Mm-hmm. So that's why you see the splintering of different organizations. We just recently started 2 months ago meeting as the black community. Because one of the things that I would hear when I would go to meetings is I would have people saying, I really have been trying to talk to the black community. Where are they? Where do they go? And I thought, well, I can't be the voice of the whole community. I'm just one person that lives here who happens to be a person of color. But we weren't meeting as an organization. And when I started talking to people of color about that, they said, what's the point? Why would we get together? Nobody cares about what we think.
I don't know that that's necessarily true. Maybe the larger majority doesn't care what you think. But I think that there are people out there who do care.
So I'm not painting, this is not a generalization. Right. This is not Cheryl doesn't care.
Right.
This is not Vince doesn't care. This is not Mark Roloff doesn't care. This is not Tony Palmieri doesn't care. But when they think about, again, when you're making decisions and setting policies and my voice is not heard or considered in those, people feel very defeated. They feel very defeated and they feel very disenchanted with their Oshkosh experience, and they're only here for a short time. Okay. When we talk to minorities here, I'm only here to complete X, whatever X is for them, and then they're taking their experiences, their income, their families, and they're picking up and moving to a place that they deem as more progressive. I mean, I know that I've heard people at the university say that they've been frustrated, that we educate kids here all the time, and they don't stay in Plant Root.
Yeah.
Why is that?
And I think that's not even just singularly related to race. I think that's for a whole lot of different reasons. Oshkosh has, I think, and it pains me to say this because I'm born and raised here.
Sure.
This is my home. But I do think, from having traveled in other places and having lived in a number of other places, I think, and just looking around at other cities in our own state, some much smaller than this, I think that Oshkosh has, for many, many years, maybe forever, had an image or a reputation of being a little bit pedestrian and not progressive at all.
Mm-hmm. And this is not a knock on Oshkosh. I chose Oshkosh. There are great things about Oshkosh. I feel safe here. My daughter is a student at UW. I feel like she's getting a quality education here. Oshkosh has a lot to offer. But the challenge with Oshkosh and cities like Oshkosh, even Winnebago County at large, is that our attitudes about real inclusiveness are about 50 years behind the times, and we need to catch up.
Yeah,
or we're going to become.
It sounds like very quickly.
Very quickly.
You know.
Yep.
You mentioned the school system, and that was one of the questions that I had. You know, what do you see as, you know, I think you kind of alluded to it. Do you see the school system here, our public school system, as being somewhat racially literate, or?
No.
Okay.
I don't. So when we look at the public school system here in Oshkosh, well, when we look at the public school system anywhere in the country, most of the teachers are female. Most of the teachers are white. Most of the teachers have had very little experience working with children of color. Most of the teachers did not go to schools that talked about race in a literate way. They got the whole color brave conversation too. So when we look at, you know, there are lots of statistics out there about expulsion rates for children of color. The last one I read is that children of color all over the country are expelled 11% more than children that are not of color. Why would that be happening? That's happening because when the teachers see things, hear things, experience things, try to teach and relate to those children, they struggle because they don't have good racial literacy. So what they may deem as behaviors or attitudes or opinions that are not in line with their academic goals, they expel those children. We have children at preschool levels being expelled, children of color.
Preschool?
Preschool.
Wow.
Expelled from school.
That's shocking.
It is.
And yet very sad.
It is. And then what does that do? I mean, you know, I hear lots of people say, well, you know, I grew up in Oshkosh and I'm a white person and I pulled myself up from the bootstrings. Well, let's think about that. So you're in pre-K, kindergarten, and you're expelled from school. That probably changes your attitude about school, probably changes your attitude about authority. You're already set on a track. There's a track from school to jail. There's a track from crib to jail for people of color in some instances.
So what can you do within the school system, for example?
Sure.
You know, to start changing that.
You know, we recently attended the Outlook 2015 meeting, and the superintendent of schools, Stan Mack, was there, and he was talking a lot about good things that are happening in schools. He was just giving a report about schools, and one of the things that he said that I thought was interesting was he said, so we have more children of color, and that changes the environment. So Jennifer, during the Q&A segment, said, well, what did you mean by that it changes the environment? Because, again, you're talking to an audience of people whose racial literacy is low. And to make that statement and not support that with any kind of data or provide any kind of scenario to support that statement, what is that leaves that sentence to interpretation. Now, my assumption is that most people interpreted that as, wow, we have more dark-skinned children than they're a problem. It's causing a problem in schools. That's probably what I'd venture to say 95% of the people in that meeting took away from that. Here's why I have two challenges with that. And I believe that Stan Mack is very well intended. This is not a knock on what he said.
Right.
There are two problems with that comment. One is exactly what I shared with you. It left to interpretation that the kids, because of their color, are the problem or are causing a problem.
Yeah.
It also made put the kids if the teachers are having a challenge engaging the children, then that's the teacher's fault, not the child's fault.
Right.
Right? Because no one's ever discriminated against because they're black. That's some of the racialized language that we hear and see in media. This happened to this person because they were black. It didn't happen to that person because they were black. It happened to that person because the person who performed that action has low racial literacy. That's why it happened to that person. Nothing happens to anybody because they're gay or because they're transgender. That's not why it happened, because then you're putting the onus of that action on the person. And I can't help that I'm black.
Right.
So it's not my fault. That didn't happen to me because I'm black. That happened to me because you, as the person who is doing the action to me, has a low racial literacy. You, as the person who's performing that action against me, grew up, as you alluded to before, with some ideas or concepts that contributed to your anger, your angst towards me. So when you say that, when you say this happened to somebody because they were black or because they were green or because they were Hmong or because they were Latino, then you're making the person who the action happened to the problem. And the person is never the problem.
That's a good point. I see what you're saying. And I, too, have been guilty of that.
Sure.
You know, of making those kinds of statements. Well, it's because they're black, or it's because they're gay, or whatever the case may be. And yet, you know, let me just play devil's advocate here.
Please.
If they weren't black or they weren't gay, that person wouldn't necessarily need racial or gender literacy in order to not discriminate, if you will. Do you know what I mean?
But there you go again, putting the onus on the person, right? So you're saying that happened to me because I was black, and if my racial literacy was better. No, it's the person who performed. Let's look at Ferguson. People are saying, people are saying that this young man was killed because he was black. He wasn't killed because he was black. He was killed because the person who shot him had a low racial literacy. That's why he was killed, possibly. I wasn't there, you weren't there, we don't know all the details, right? But if you're looking at this from a surface, from an aerial view, people are saying, oh, he was killed because he was black. He wasn't killed because he was black. He was killed because the person who shot him could possibly have had some racialized attitudes or opinions that contributed to his death. So by saying what you said, you put the onus on me. I'm the problem. I'm the issue because I'm black. And that's what racial literacy causes you to look at. It never changes your opinion. It never says, you have to like me now because you're now racially literate. It's not designed to do that. You'll walk away from racial literacy workshop with the same opinions you have. That's not our job. We never put words in your mouth and say this and don't say that. Say African American and don't say black. That's not what our workshops are about. Our workshops are about when you see sentences like that Tracey Robertson was hurt, discriminated against because she was black, you'll know that's a racialized comment. That's not true. In fact, that's just simply not true.
I get exactly what you're saying, and yet I'm still thinking that I think when people probably say he was black, she was black, they were gay, whatever the case may be, I don't know that they're really saying they're the problem. I think what they're probably, at least when I say it, I can't speak for anybody else, but at least when I'm making comments like that and guilty as charged, I'm saying that person who committed that act on that person, you know, was not racially tolerant, and I don't like that word either because that's like you have to tolerate something, you know. But I'm using words here that most people use and I think can probably relate to. They're either racist or they're, you know, not accepting of gays or whatever the case may be. I'm not saying that these things happen to these individuals because they're the problem, because they're a different sexual orientation or they're a different race or a different ethnicity. I'm saying it's because those things are what they are, these people have problems and therefore committed those acts against these people. I mean, I think that's maybe what people mean when they say it.
You're not intending to say that, but that's in fact what you are saying.
Yeah.
And so that's what racial literacy does. It doesn't focus on intent, because it's probably safe to say that most people are well-intended. It focuses on impact. That's what it focuses on. Because the impact of what you said is that then when you're saying that to your other white colleagues, it's all the systemic stuff we grew up with. You're really saying that I'm to blame. That contributes to all the systemic things that we see, right?
Okay.
So your intent is not to say that, but you are in fact saying that. And that's what racial literacy forces you to do. It never has you look at the intent. Because again, most people are well intended. It always has you look at the impact. What did what you say, how did that hurt or exclude or discard, or what was the impact? Who is it impacting, and what was that impact?
I'm probably about as racially as illiterate as most of the other people in this community.
But you've come a long way
That's what I'm finding out.
But you've come a long way this evening.
Well, I feel like I have, and I feel like I'm in my infancy here with my learning. But and what you just said, I kind of want to go back to what you said, almost at the beginning of the program, Tracey, is that, and I'm sorry, I can't remember if they said it to your daughter or to you, about how well-spoken they were. And see, there's another case where I don't think someone, they meant to be paying a compliment.
Yes.
And yet it was kind of a slap in the face at the same time. And again, they were well-intended, I'm sure.
Yes, I would agree. Again, it's the intent. So white people don't walk around to other white people and say, gosh, you speak well. They don't do that.
Oh, sometimes I do. Sometimes I do, because it drives me. Being a journalist, and being in communications, it drives me crazy when people don't use proper English.
Yes,
and so I'm one of those people who do say, "Wow, you are very articulate. You are so well spoken." But you're right; most people don't.
Right, and in my culture, and I've had people then tack on to that sentence and say, oh, well, you must be special, as if I'm some mystical black person. You must have gone to some very special school. You must have. My grandmother, who never finished high school, who finished high school but never went to college, who worked as a receptionist at the VA until her dying days, was probably one of the most articulate women I knew. Everybody, and then some people will say to me, well, you must be the only one who, everyone that I know speaks how I speak. Everyone that I know. So it's not. I'm not some mystical black person because I can conjugate a verb. You'd be surprised to know that most black people can't. Some might be surprised to know can conjugate a verb. What that is the racialized images that we see of people of color in the media. The people who don't speak well, the people who are the antagonists, the opposite of everything that most of us are the people that the media sensationalize. So people who grew up in cities like Oshkosh expect me to be hip-hop and speak poor English because that's the only images, or those are the majority of the images that the media shows of people of color, not just black people. So that's why this is such an epiphany for people when they see that I can speak English, is because most of the people that they've seen on television, most of the stories they've read, have painted a different picture of people in my culture.
I can't believe that this hour has almost flown by, but we're down to like 3 minutes.
Okay.
And we haven't covered half of what I wanted to talk about.
We have not.
But we'll have you back again sometime, and maybe then Jennifer can join us or something. But you've only been in operation here for about 6 months, a little less as we tape this. Give me just a snapshot of what some of your successes have been, and what some of your challenges have been, besides dealing with people like me.
You've been fantastic. So some of our successes have been, we've got a great partnership with the University of Oshkosh, Wisconsin. We're doing a lot of training and partnering with them. That's been fantastic because those teachers who are going to ultimately be in our schools, they need this racial literacy. We've done training with the Winnebago Literacy Council. We recently got the thumbs up to move forward with the Boys and Girls Club. So there have been lots of churches and faith leaders who are getting on board with this training and having these conversations. That's been pretty exciting. Our challenges have been some of the things we talked about, helping people to understand why these conversations are important. Certainly, like any nonprofit or startup, Getting funding. We've been applying for lots of grants. We've gotten some. We haven't gotten some. So getting funding, finding volunteers, some of those typical business startup sorts of things that all businesses experience.
Okay. And you've got a website. I think we've been putting it up throughout the show. Currently, as we tape this, it's undergoing a reconstruction thing.
It is.
It doesn't say that on the page,
Right.
but it is. And so when do you think that'll be done and ready to roll out?
We've recently gotten a student at the university to get that up and going for us, so we're hopeful that he'll be able to do that right after Christmas break. But what I would encourage people to do is follow us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. We have a very active and engaging Facebook and Twitter page, and that's how most people are starting to get some racial literacy, reading some of our articles, engaging with us, watching our work, finding out about our workshops. Facebook is the place to go.
Sure. And it's very easy to find on Facebook. Just go to Facebook and type in Fit Oshkosh, and it pops right up. Very, very easy to find, and you're right, there's a lot of good information there. And you also run, not run, but you write and operate a blog called Black Voices of Oshkosh.
That's right.
And there's a lot of good information there as well. It's a website and a blog kind of thing.
Correct.
So I was poking around there too and got some good information.
Good.
So
fantastic.
How else can people reach you?
Well, they can certainly reach out to us on Facebook. They can email me. My email is Tracey, it's Tracey, Robertson @att.net. Those would probably be the best ways to contact us.
Okay, fantastic. And you do have volunteer opportunities available?
We do have volunteer opportunities available. We've got a lot coming up in 2015, more training at the state level. We want to do a YouTube page. There's lots of opportunity for media, marketing, producers, those kinds of things. We could always use people to help us with fundraising, grant writing. You know, as a new startup, come in with your skill set. We can probably find a place to utilize you.
Excellent.
Yes.
Well, Tracey, thank you so much for being here. It has been an absolute pleasure, and I do want to have you back because you saw my list of questions. We didn't even get close to covering them.
It's a new conversation. So,
it is,
yeah,
and one that needs to be continued. So thank you again, and we will definitely have you back. And you mentioned about volunteers, and that brings me to a point in the show where you know, we're always looking for folks to help out with this show. It only takes a few hours a month, and you know, you don't get paid for it, but you get a lot of good training, and it's a lot of fun. You get a good education, and you pick up some new skills that you can hopefully apply somewhere else in life. So you know, like I said, it's a few hours a month, and what I'd like to do is get enough of a group of people so that people only have to work on the show every other month if they want to. So that's something that I'm putting out there. If you're interested in that, you can contact me through the Facebook page, like you can reach Tracey at, or you can email me at ionoshkosh@gmail.com. Or if push comes to shove, leave a message for them here at OCMS, and they'll get me the information. So that's one thing I wanted to say. You do have to be 16 years of age or older, though. The other thing that I wanted to say is, again, you know, thank you to Tony for filling in for me during the month of November. Also on November 20th, my director, Daryl Dukacek, and his daughter, who also works on the crew, Amanda, they welcomed a new baby into their family. So Daryl has a new granddaughter, and Amanda has a new niece. And during she gave birth the very night that we were taping a show. Tony was here, of course, but so Ian Bartlett filled in during that evening, and we certainly want to give a big thank you to him as well as to Tony for filling in. And you know, we're getting close to the year end here. As we do so, I want to thank all the guests we've had throughout the year, and of course all the viewers that we've had as well, both in the local area and on YouTube. You know, we couldn't do this show without the crew, and we wouldn't have any reason for doing it if not for you. And that rhymes. So I didn't expect that was going to rhyme, but it did. So I just want to say thank you to all of you as well. So anyway, thank you for joining us. We will see you next time. Until then, keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.